Welcome to LMS Evaluation, an expert's guide to making better learning technology choices, hosted by Talented Learning and eLogic Learning Today. We're really excited for this presentation. For those of you that have been following along on Talented Learning webinars every 3 weeks here throughout this season, you'll know that we pack in way too much information, so it's fast-paced throughout the whole hour, and expect today to be the same way. Thanks for showing up. We have really people registered from all over the world, so it's really exciting that a topic such as LMS selection can still garner so many registrants. We hope to make it worth your while today. Our goal today is different. So there's a lot of these presentations around put on by different vendors and different analysts in the industry. I've seen them now for 10 plus years, but we're going to take a different tack today. We're coming at it from the angle of really experience of being down in the front lines. We'll tell you about that. But to get started, what we're going to do today is it's different now in 2017 than it was 3 years ago, 10 years ago certainly, or 15 years ago when you may have invested or thought about investing in your first learning management system. So we're going to start off today by overviewing the 2017 LMS market, how it's different briefly than before. And then we're going to roll into a concept of understanding the LMS buying cycles, not cycle, but cycles, and something that's also changed in 2015 just by the nature of the technology on how you can buy a learning management system. And then we're going to tackle, from a practical standpoint, probably the biggest hurdle that every organization has to face, which is how to get budget approval. All of it is for naught. All of it is just theoretical until you have the money to spend on a learning management system. So we're going to talk about that and talk about best practices on building that business case and getting over the budget hurdle. And we're going to base that, once again, on our experience of seeing lots of projects get funded and not get funded over the years. And then finally, we're going to roll up the presentation on what factors matter most, what selection factors matter most in 2017. And it may not be what you expect, or it's probably not what you expect because the market is so different. Go ahead and ask questions throughout. We've got a lot of content, so we'll try to answer them in line along the way and as well at the end of the presentation. And if by chance we don't get to your question, we'll follow up personally with you. So introduce who's speaking here in just a second. I'm John Lay. I am CEO and lead analyst at Talented Learning. And Talented Learning is a fiercely independent research and analyst and consulting company dedicated to learning technology. I am a blogger, and we do webinars, and we write premium and present premium content all around helping organizations understand the marketplace, learning technology marketplace, options, how to buy better, and we give actionable and practical advice, which is different in the industry. We're not talking about theoretical or futuristic things very much at Talented Learning. What we're doing is bringing the practical advice learned from many years in the trenches, and we do things like selection consulting and requirements definition and short list recommendations for LMS buyers, all with the goal of helping LMS buyers buy better. And so finally, here we are. So I'm John Lay. My story is 22 years ago or so, I got a master's degree in instructional technology. I've been square in the middle of the space ever since that point. I started off my career making e-learning content, being an e-learning content developer, and working with teams to develop that for third-party clients. We're part of a vendor community, and but in that process of working to create content, I got a job for a company called Wilson Learning, who I think we have some people on today, which are sales experts and teach people how to be sales experts. And I want to work with them to learn how to create e-learning or help them create e-learning content out of some of their traditional content. And before they let me or others touch that, we had to go through this whole long sales curriculum on how to solution sell and curriculum sell, and it turned an instructional technologist into a sales guy. So I spent 13 years for two major companies selling high-end learning management systems, And during all that time, on the front lines of buying and selling and doing demonstrations and seeing the pitfalls and watching buyers do well and not well, and seeing the consultants who are good and not good that are involved along the process. And 4 years ago, I thought, you know what, I could probably do that ourselves. So I quit my sales job and I co-founded Talented Learning to be an independent place to go for learning technology advice. And along my journey in my sales life, I met a fellow named Aaron Olney. And Aaron's, I'll let Aaron introduce himself, but if not the most experienced, certainly in the top tier of most experienced learning technology sales professionals that I've ran into. So Aaron?
Well, thanks, John. From one old LMS sales dog to another, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to co-present with you today. Hello to everybody out there in Cyberland. My name, as John said, is Aaron Olney. I do bring a lot of experience to the table when it comes to LMS sales and technology and general overall background. I've been in this space for over 20 years now, and I've worked at lots of different learning management system companies over that time. Currently, I work for and am Vice President of Sales and Marketing for eLogic Learning. I've been here for the last 4 years, and I can tell you that I'm really happy and excited to be a part of such a great organization. As it relates to what we're talking about today, I think I have lots of valuable insight and experience to bring to the table. I have, during my career, responded to well over probably 500 RFPs over the last 20 years. I can tell you that it has been quite a daunting task, so hopefully we'll give you some insight and information that will help you here today. As for a quick overview of who we are as a company, here's sort of that nutritional information you find on the back of the cereal box. eLogic Learning is a learning management system provider. We're a best-of-breed provider that's been in the industry for 16 years, building only learning management systems. We have over 5 million users in 166 countries. Each of them, I believe, has the same common denominator. They were very interested in finding a company to partner with to help them achieve their goals and objectives. And so we pride ourselves on the fact that we bring that partner mentality to the table. Certainly we've won lots of awards, but none more important or none more exciting than the one that John and Talented Learning provided us, Best All-Purpose LMS for 2015 and 16. Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, 500 RFPs is certainly daunting if you just think about that in terms of 100 pages in RFP. You're looking at 500,000 pages of just RFP responses from you alone. So me and Aaron got to, as we were doing this, we got to thinking real quick, what are the metrics of, what a salesperson has to do and what we've done in our careers. And, what's normal is that you're probably in a given year talking to 50 organizations about purchasing a learning management system. So you're seeing 50 different approaches every single year. That turns into maybe 20 or so in a given year RFP responses that a salesperson has to do. And we each had those 20-some years of selling, and we added that up and we thought, holy cow, we've been a part of about 2,000 sales processes, at least 800 RFPs. We tried to count up the dollars of the contracts that we were a part of, and we easily got to over $100 million in our combined 40 years. So that's why you should listen to us. Okay, here we go. The 2017 learning management market. This is different. If you haven't been looking in a while, it is so different. So, but let's start off. Let's start off with a very relevant poll, and you'll see how relevant here in just a second.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here, John, and for those of you out there, the poll that we're doing today to start this is which of the below best describes your training organization's focus? Employees, extended enterprise, which is really the channel and partner organization, a combination of the two, students or members. So please go ahead and vote now, and we'll take a look at the tallies here momentarily.
All right, and so let me close this out, and Sherry, got to be quick on our polls. We got a lot of content today, so we'll let me share the results. Let me share the results so you can see. This is what's interesting, and this is what I knew was going to happen, is 47% employees, 11% extended enterprise, 23% both employees and extended enterprise, 13% students. But what you see is that if you would have done the same poll a few years ago, the second and the third choices would almost have been non-existent, because it was either employees or students for so much time in the learning management space. And now there's different focuses of learning management systems. We'll get into that in a second, but just by the nature of the poll here, this is really perfect for what we were thinking. And so leads us right into the next one. Let's take a look at this real quick, and I guess if you're going to...
All right. So what best describes your organization? Select one of the choices below. We want to buy our first LMS. We want to replace our current LMS. We love our LMS. What's an LMS? Or other, if none of those apply.
We got somebody that chooses what's an LMS. So an LMS is a learning management system. Keeps track of users and content and the interrelation between the two. We got some people chatting to us also, but it's pretty close here. Look at this. 36%, we want to buy our first LMS. 38%, we want to replace our LMS. We do have 11% that love our LMS. They must be your customers, Aaron. They must be yours.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's hide that out. This is relevant here because we'll see how this is different than it used to be. So let me put my talented learning hat and my analyst hat on. So what we had here 10 years ago, there might have been 25 viable vendors. And they were mainly in the academic, for either that's higher ed or K through 12, or they're in the corporate space. And these 25 different vendors, they all looked pretty much the same, in my opinion. Those were hard years in selling from a differentiation standpoint, because you could almost search and replace an RFP response and change one name for your competitors, and it would be almost identical, because everybody's goal was really to build the biggest, most comprehensive learning management system that could do everything. And that's what everybody built for the most part. And so, buyers from that standpoint were really forced to get these big generalist systems and try to do a lot of heavy lifting to get them to work right for their populations. But thankfully, cloud computing came along here in the last 7 to 10 years. It's really changed everything in the industry. Aaron and I both on both sides of this change, of course. Before cloud computing, we were selling server-side type LMSs. My first one was Ingenium, if any old-timers on the line today. But in the last 7 to 10 years, what happened is that the LMSs went up into the cloud, and it solved the challenges of the IT deployment. And so you no longer need IT staff to come in there and buy servers and deploy. And it automated the cloud that allowed automation of integrations. And so there wasn't necessarily the need to have these big, expensive integrations anymore. They could be productized. And not only that, because you could get rid of the technology challenges and the integration hurdles, it made it so that it was a lot easier to set up an implementation or set up an LMS. You no longer had to deploy it. You just really had to configure your LMS. And on top of that, the cloud enabled the change up of the license model. So instead of paying up front and owning a license, you rent it now, just like a subscription. You pay for it monthly or quarterly or annually. And what that's done is it's lowered the bar for the marketplace, and has allowed hundreds and hundreds, 700 total vendors to enter the marketplace in the last 10 years. And so now, depending on who you're talking to, it's anywhere from 700 to even 1,000 potential learning management system. Now, not everybody calls it a learning management system. They call it different things, but it's managing users and content and the interrelation between the two. And a lot of that explosion, because of the cloud, was the aversion to the old school vendors. And so those same 25 vendors have been around forever. All their names, it's all the ones that have been around forever, the largest talent management providers. But what buyers didn't like was just the support level, the cost, and the time to implement. And if you weren't a big client, it was hard to fit in an organization like that. And not only that, because they were built in the era before the cloud, most of them lacked the social capabilities, the mobile focus, the adaptive learning, gamification, all those things that are now in modern systems. And so the big companies have bolted those on and tried to backfill their applications, but end users still aren't buying it because the applications are just so big in their compliance focus. And on top of that, just like we saw on that first slide, learning is now spread way beyond just employees and students, but it's in the extended enterprise. Organizations training their channels, their sales channels, franchise dealers training their customers of selling content, even if that's not your primary business, but to sell complementary content to your primary line of business has become huge. And all those things have made the rise of extended enterprise learning and the requirements that go along with that a core focus. And so what's ended up happening is that we went from 2 types of learning management companies to really 4 different focuses: corporate, association, continuing education, and academic. And here's where it starts getting challenging. These 700 vendors live somewhere inside of here, but some live over on this side, so they're just about selling content. Some organizations like eLogic Learning kind of falls inside and covers a lot of different bases because of the nature of their application. Some learning management systems will just for customer learning, or just for channel learning, or just through K through 12, or just for elementary school. And now probably the largest growing segment is just for professional associations and supporting member-based organizations. And to make matters even more challenging, in each one of these circles, there is different types different types of companies that occupy that space, from generalists to specialists, and they differentiate on a variety of things, but the intended use, the functionality, because each one of these different circles has different functionality, different functionality requirements. Like compliance requirements are very important in corporate, but they're not so important or important at all in association. And so we'll see the different types of vendors going in these different directions and differentiating on implementation, how they set up, the support they provide, and even how they license. And when you look at each one of those circles or combination of those circles, from a service standpoint, it's really changed. Back for many, many years, for 20 years, every vendor was a full service vendor. They provided project teams, on-site implementations, integrations, historical data migrations, content development. But with the cloud, there's now been the ability to have free self-service vendors where you can just go get a free trial and sign up and start paying if you want for a nominal price, or maybe reactive assisted setup. So it's no longer on-site, but it's provide you some type of resource or customer support to help get you set up. And so depending on your needs, there's different vendors that specialize in all these different areas, and depending on the seriousness of your implementation, it's important to go looking in the right spot, because the downside of 700 LMS providers is that you got to figure out who you want to talk to. And so it's now more critical than ever to think seriously about what your requirements are. But what that also means is that 2017 is a buyer's market. It's about supply and demand. If there's only a few vendors out there, the vendors all look the same, they all price the same, their implementations were the same, and it was really hard to get that differentiation from a seller or a buyer standpoint. But now with the specialization, there might be less functionality, but it's more focused. And so if you can find what you need, you don't need all that extra functionality, so you don't need to pay for it, you don't need to make decisions on it, you don't need to spend money on it to support it. And so specialization now is leading to success of learning technology. And this range of services implementation cost is important. If you're, AT&T and you've got employees in every corner of the world, you need system integration type or system integrator type power to be able to try to deploy a system on every continent and in dozens of languages. But you could also just be a blogger or a professor that has, decades of knowledge that they want to get out, and they want to do that all self-service. And so now really anybody can enter the marketplace. And the new license models have changed the way that vendors count for vendors count for usage on their systems, and that allows. So previously, it was you were a named user, and that's great if you're an employee. But what happens if you didn't know who your users were, or your users rotated like they do in associations or in e-commerce? And so those type of models didn't work. So the new models have been invented so that you can align how you're going to use the LMS, your intended use, with how you pay for it. And that's new. And all of that has led to reduced costs for all the way to from the system integrator type systems all the way down to the small business type system. The whole industry has lowered the cost point, which makes it more effective really for everybody. And so all of that has led to, though, a second challenge, and that's the two buying cycles that have now occurred. Before, there was only one buying cycle that was ever there. And a buying cycle is the steps that an organization has to go through to buy an LMS or to buy anything. To buy a car, to buy an HR system. It's those steps that you have to go through. So we talked about, and we saw on the poll here, we almost had a split in between first-time buyers, which are small and medium businesses, the corporate extended enterprise, that continuing education and association. And those small first-time buyers, they don't have any bad habits yet. They don't have any users. They don't usually have much or any content. There's no historical data that they have to worry about. Nobody's thinking about big integrations. You can just upload a spreadsheet of your 50 employees. You have small budgets. So there's a lot of first-time buyers that kind of fit into this category. They're looking to prove the business case, and they're a lot different than replacement buyers. So the replacement buyers are all sectors, but because there was only employee and academic systems, anybody else that tried to use technology that wasn't an employee or an academic system previously, they had to basically make a system work for them. So they had to take an employee system and bend it sideways to try to make it work for e-commerce or for supporting the channel. And so replacement buyers, right now, they have the opportunity to get off those old systems, the talent systems that they don't need, especially if they're not using that talent, and to go towards these specialization systems. And so a lot of the activity in the marketplace right now is organizations getting off the big old generalist wagon and getting onto some sleeker machines here, sleeker systems that are really tuned to their business, their business need. So can you buy a new LMS? So from a number standpoint, I started off this presentation saying it'd be about the practical pieces and the actionable pieces. So the most practical can't get it out. It comes down to the numbers. So from a practical standpoint, do you even want to go through any of this process? And here's some questions to ask. Just from a number, this isn't strategy. This is tactical. Have you purchased your LMS 4 years ago? Has your LMS company been acquired? Do you own the dinosaur called a perpetual license? Do you pay something called annual support and maintenance? Do you host your own LMS? Do you activate and deactivate users to stay under your user count? I know if this was a poll, we'd be getting hands up on all of these right now. Are you on an older version and you can't upgrade because you let a couple versions go by and now you're stuck? All these things are what we run into, both from what we run into over the years. But right now, if you can answer yes to any of these questions, you can make a pure numbers argument for an upgrade. Okay? But the key for most buyers is to make the price value and the ROI and the no pain, no gain, or there must be, there's got to be a business reason to tie your purchase together. And so price value is that. It's either about decreasing costs, improving your business processes, or increasing revenue. And these are the things that you tie that return on investment. Are you trying to decrease your training costs, decrease travel, decrease support calls? Or are you trying to decrease the time of product rollouts or the speed at which you onboard partners? Or do you want to drive revenue from the sale of content or through the sale of your products through your channels or through your customer upgrade and renewal rates. All those things are the key. So if you can answer the question, yeah, you bought your LMS 4 years ago and you have these problems that you want to improve, that's where you need to be from a learning standpoint. So, Aaron, talking too much here. You should give me the proverbial hook. But, what are you seeing out, in the marketplace of new vendors? Are they coming at this from a pure cost standpoint, or is it other things now from a price value standpoint that seem to me more important in 2017? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, obviously with 700 plus vendors, you're going to see all of those things taking place. And so where we end up competing, we end up finding ourselves competing against companies that are coming in it from simply a cost perspective, because that's really the new horizon, so to speak. You've got organizations that in the past couldn't get into these larger systems that handle more complex business needs, that have these full robust implementations. You couldn't really go there. And so now you've got a lot of people that are, with the cloud technology that you mentioned and everything going on there, they've got an opportunity to sort of get into the market, buy an LMS. And with that, you have a lot of companies on both sides of the equation that are approaching it from a price perspective. Mm-hmm. Clearly, that makes sense for organizations and that have simple needs, and some of those things we'll talk about here. But I think the real opportunity is for organizations to really monetize the ROI and to really look at the opportunities. And I know we're going to talk more about that, but look at the opportunities that are being presented to your organization and figure out how you can really monetize that so you can have a true example of ROI, and that'll help you throughout these buying cycles.
Right. It's not only going to help you, dealing with vendors, but it's going to help you dealing with your management. So that's just to get the money in the first place. If you can't tie to any of these, it's hard to get budget just on we're going to save costs. But it's certainly possible. But hey, let's take a look at these buying cycles real quick. So this is the traditional buying cycle. This wasn't invented with LMSs. This is invented probably by the government or governments here in just regular procurement processes that have been developed to keep it fair, to keep it equitable, to keep it scientific, to make sure that you can measure apples to apples. This is what vendors go through. Each one of these steps, I wrote blog posts on here. You could do a whole presentation on any one of these steps. So we're not going to go into like you do this and this step, but rather just kind of look at it holistically here. But the traditional buying cycle is figure out what you need, and then you figure out who you need to talk to from a vendor standpoint, and you figure out what that cost would be for their new qualified solution. And then you write your business case that includes those ROI metrics that we talked about and the cost for the new system, and you compare that against the cost of your current system, and you either get budget approval or you don't when you put that all together. And so that the dotted line right there represents that the traditional buying cycle will typically cross over 2 fiscal years, not necessarily 2 full years, though it can even last longer than that, but 2 fiscal years is very common because the first fiscal year you have to do the research to get to the point where you can even ask the money, and then the second fiscal year is when you have the money from a buying organization, and then you do the request for proposal, and you already know who the short list vendors are because you did that in the prior fiscal year, and then you do those use case demonstrations. We'll talk a little bit about that, but those are typically the 2 or 3 hour big demonstrations that you do to make sure that each of your shortlist vendors are showing you the same type of things that you need to run your business. Then you do sandboxes or references, and then you finally select a vendor contract negotiation, and you go and deploy that system. And so that's good for the traditional buying cycle. Is good for a lot of scenarios because what it does is it protects you. It protects you, and it leaves a record. for all time of the steps that you took and how you arrived at that decision, and that it wasn't willy-nilly. Now, when you're talking 50 or 10 or 100 or $1 million, 100,000 or $1 million, it's good to have a scientifically defensible manner to show how you made that decision for time. The disadvantages of the traditional buying cycle, though, is it does seem longer. And it seems like there's a lot of work you got to do up front to make this work with defining your requirements and finding what vendors that you want to talk to. And because of that, there's significant vendor management to go through each of your vendor contracts or contacts, for that couple year period. So this can seem like a big laborious process, but if you're on your second or your third or your fourth LMS, or you're spending any significant amount of money, you got to do it. There's no way to get around it. And if you don't do it, you're just opening yourself up to risk and a chance that you're having a mismatch with vendors and dissatisfaction down the road. We've just seen it time and time again in both of our careers of not doing this, leading to poor technology choices. However, what's happened is that there's this new instant free trial concept. And what that means, and all of you, or a lot of you that have been surfing LMSs and looking at different LMSs right now, are seeing it, where you can just say, try it right now. Not, talk to a salesperson button, or, give us a call, or we'll give you a handheld demo. But rather, here, just open up your own domain. You can start playing. We're not going to talk to you. We'll barely call you. You can check out, what features that we have. If you like it, after the end of that 30-day period or 2-week period, you could start paying us for usage. And that's the new instant free trial cycle. Now, who's this good for? Well, it's good for first-time buyers. It's good for buyers that have one or two people, or just a handful of people in their organization. And, they can take the time to learn on the fly and to do it on the cheap. There's little risk because, you can go check these systems out. But the problem is, and it's easy to sell to management because, you pay, you can start off really super small with no upfront cost. And so, you can really prove the business case in your organization just by starting small. But the disadvantages is that you're letting the functionality of the systems drive your requirements. And you're also, because you're not defining your requirements up front, and you never know, I keep on running into organizations, they don't know when to stop reviewing vendors, so they try to do my job. So in the 4 years, or in our fourth year, I'm now up to 125 or so learning management systems that I reviewed. Out of those 700 to 1,000, so I still got a way to go. Well, buyers kind of get stuck in that cycle too. They're like, wow, if I settle for this one, what about the next one? And so in the end, it's actually a longer budget cycle than it needs to be, because they don't know when to stop, or they try to do too many simultaneously. But regardless, the problem is that it's really heavy on the functional qualification. But what this leads is to buyer confusion about which model they should be using and are using. What are your thoughts about that, Aaron? I bet you see that.
Yeah, that occurs in almost every sales process that we're in. Frequently, we're competing against organizations that are more the traditional type of vendor, and then also competing against these types of organizations. And what ultimately happens there is we run into a situation where it boils down to a discussion around, why is our price for services and implementation higher than this other organization? And it drives people to only look at what is most evident, which is functionality. And do you have a system that can do instructor-led training? Yes, check the box. Well, instructor-led training is much deeper and much more complex than just a yes or a no. And so, we find ourselves in a situation in almost every single sales process where we're having to educate the buyer on what the differences are between not only the implementations, but also the products and the vendor types that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and with two different approaches, and buyers, and I just see it every day, buyers just aren't sure. what the difference is, and it's just hard to see at first blush. So the upside from the buyer's market of 2017 is there's 700 different vendors out there with different approaches. The downside of the 2017 market is there's 700 vendors out there with
700 vendors
with different approaches. So, but no matter what, whether you're a onesie, twosie first-time buyer or whether you're a seasoned, gnarled, pessimistic LMS buyer that's been around for decades, has seen every possible failure that could happen, you still have to get budget, and you have to get over that budget hurdle. And so, let's go back and do another poll real quick.
All right, so have you had trouble securing budget for a new or replacement LMS? Options, of course, are pretty straightforward. Yes, no. No, then yes, maybe, and other.
All right, and the horse race.
I'm going to assume there's a lot of yes out there, John.
For anybody that has no, I'm going to send you an email later. Maybe you can send me your tips on how you could get through this hurdle. But I think this is the biggest challenge. Aaron and I often joked over the years. Aaron and I worked together for a handful of years, about a decade ago already. But one of the jokes that we always have, that if we would have gotten paid or actually sold all the opportunities that we won, we'd be retired by now. And behind that is that there's a lot of LMS selections that go on where the budget isn't secured up front. So they go through that 2 fiscal year process only to, we'll share those results, 43% yes. So 2 out of 4 of us here having a hard time getting budget. But go through that whole process without actually having the budget secure, and spend a lot of time both internally, from a buying organization standpoint and demos of going through this whole process, but not being able to actually make that final purchase because the budget was never locked up. And so a lot of that has to do with that 2-step process, and the rest of it has to do with I believe tying to that business case. So we'll hide this result and show you how you could potentially think about this. But what are those obstacles, Aaron?
So I think, we've got a good list of obstacles here. All of these come into play. Certainly, without executive support, you're not going to be able to establish a budget. Politically impossible is another really interesting one, in that, the original LMS purchase took some time and took some energy and had people making decisions, and ultimately those decisions were made. So people feel like if they switch the LMS that they have, they might end up with a target on their back. So politically impossible is a pretty significant one. Lots of others on here, but I think the most important of the bunch is really this lack of perceived ROI. It really applies to everything. If you can't build that business case from a return on investment perspective, then all of these other things are going to come into play. But if you can monetize this upgrade or this update to the new system, you can monetize the opportunity that a new LMS brings to the table, all of these go away. Now, instead of having a target on your back from having picked an LMS that doesn't meet your needs today, now you're going to be seen as somebody who's bringing new ideas to the table that can make money or save money or mitigate some type of risk in the organization, which ultimately would give some valuable ROI.
Mm-hmm. And back in the olden days, because you had to buy and pay for your license up front, that obstacle was really tough to overcome, because you had already spent your $500 or your $1 million up front, and now you're using that system. So to switch off that system, there's that fear of sunk costs as part of the political, and that somebody made a wrong decision. But because it's so much smoother now from a cost standpoint, a lot of those obstacles that used to be obstacles have went away. And so you have buyers now, especially the point person in a buying organization has an opportunity, I think, to be a hero, because there's a lot of money to be saved by looking at replacements. So, so let's look at a formula. So this is really simple, though. This is really simple. Here's how you get budget. Figure out what you're spending right now, and you figure out that measurable return on investment. What are those cost and missed opportunities? We'll talk about that. What are the missed opportunities right now with your current system that you're not monetizing? And you add all that up, and you compare that to the cost of new qualified solutions. And if the new qualified solutions are less, then you have a business case, and it's as simple as that. And if you have that business case, you'll get people to listen, because there's not an organization in the world that doesn't want to do better with less. And so that's what this formula does. So let's take a look at the different pieces of that. Aaron?
Yeah, so obviously step one, I think, is to grab your contracts, pull them out, and take a look at what's in there. Many of us probably weren't around the company when the first LMS was actually purchased, and we may not have even had access to the contracts or looked at them in the last several years. So find out what you should be getting versus what you are getting, and how much you're paying for it. Some of the specifics there that I think you need to pay attention to are, how are licenses counted? With all the new licensing models today, there may be an opportunity to change the license definition by moving to a new system. What modules or what functionality is included. If you decide that you want to turn on the mobile application, or you want to do something with the social components, is that going to cost you more money? Take a look at some of those components. And then, are you paying for support, upgrades, hosting? A lot of those contracts from the past, you might be, and you may not even realize that if you haven't seen a contract in years. But obviously, I think one of the most significant pieces to pay particular attention to is that service level agreement. Figure out exactly what the expectations are on both sides of that. If your vendor says that they'll call you back in 2 weeks and that's what you agreed to, then they're meeting their service level agreement. However, it probably doesn't meet your needs today. So you want to take a look at, again, what you were promised, what you're getting, and what you really need, and ultimately how much does all that cost you.
Yep, because that's the baseline then. That's really the baseline of understanding exactly. I think the other point to make on that real quickly is that because prior to the cloud, contracts were a lot hairier than they are today. And so there was lots of modules, lots of line items, lots of this and that. And so you got to get it all on a spreadsheet and line that up so that you can see exactly what those costs are. I ask my clients all the time, like, well, how much are you spending? And you know what? Almost nobody can answer that without saying, well, hang on, let me go back. So it's, let me go back and see what we spent last year. It's like not on the tip of anybody's tongue. So that's why you have to take that step. But missed opportunities, Aaron.
Yeah, so, once you've done all of that, I think then the second part of your equation is to figure out and identify the opportunity costs. What could you be doing that you're not doing? So, in the ways of some of that missed functionality, there are new modules, new enhancements all the time coming to the market. Do you have those included in the contract? Is that an add-on that you're going to have to pay for? Who could you be reaching out to that you're not? Back to this missed audience. This is, the hot new trend that's been evolving over the last probably 10 years, is the idea of training those channels, your customers, your partners, that extended enterprise. What efficiencies could you gain that you're not? What are you missing in terms of automation? Are you able to schedule reports today in your system versus a new system that enables you to do that? Just pieces in parts there in terms of administrative overhead.
Yep. And really the last one that we should have put on here is just really any manual intervention. So what I run into all the time is this will be automated. You'll get the notification to the student. The student will take the course. They'll finish the course. The grades will go in. The grade will be in the LMS. It's now marked complete, but then there's a manual step to transfer that to another system so they get continuing education credit, for example.
Right.
And so, you're paying for somebody to sit there and, copy and paste from one form into another. All that has costs, and really the point is if you turn over a lot of rocks inside your organization, especially with the audiences and the automation, you're going to find that there's pockets of return on investment there. So the second part of that equation, so we looked at the contracts, we got the costs that we're spending now, we determined from the missed opportunities exactly that opportunity cost that we have, and so now you need to identify potential learning management system vendors. And so this was easy 10 years ago because you just started at the 12 that were corporate or the 12 that were academic and you went from there. But now you have 700, so how do you go about that? Well, what you don't want to do is reinvent the wheel, and you don't want to have my job, or maybe you do, but you don't want to do that on the side and go through and try to qualify each one of these vendors. My job, it's easy because they know I'm not going to buy anything, but if you're a buyer and you have to qualify each one of these things, you get immediately entered into the sales process. So it's very laborious and time consuming to do that own shortlisting. So where do you go? Don't reinvent the wheel. Just there's so many resources out there that'll help you. There's industry analysts like myself and many others that cover the space or the HR space or the academic space that you can read their blogs and white papers and buy their reports. There's online reviews all over the place where you can see what other customers are saying. But my favorite one is to use LinkedIn by just asking a question in LinkedIn or the LinkedIn groups that are available, or asking your peers in LinkedIn, your professional friends who they're using. But now it's so interesting from a LinkedIn standpoint when somebody puts a specific business case up there and they say, how can you help me? Not to me personally, but just out to the open LinkedIn community. What the responses that you get back there are phenomenal to, I think, to help guide you in the right place. Sometimes it could be overwhelming, but in any case, that's where you go to try to find out who are these closest vendors, based on your particular need. And you'll see top 10 lists and top 5 lists. And so, if you put your research hat on and you spend a few days going through the available resources, you'll be able to at least get to a modicum of vendors here that you don't have to look at 700, but you maybe get that list down to about 5 or 8 that you could start that qualification process. There's also things like shortlisting services where people will, like myself, will help you figure it out.
John, if I could add one thing on this here too, any vendor that you're talking to should be asking you questions to help understand whether you're a good fit for them and whether they're a good fit for you or not. So not only do you have the opportunity to get all this information from analysts and websites and all these other areas, people that you know and so forth, but the vendor should be doing you a justice by educating you on the market and telling you if you're not a good fit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we'll get to what you can do to prepare for that, to make that an easier process of sharing with the vendor what you need so that they can give you a realistic assessment of if you're a good fit. And that's one of the big advantages of doing your requirements. So, but with the shortlister, to get this budget, we need to look about first whether we can spend less than we're currently spending. So we got to get these cost estimates from the vendors. And this is the tricky part, because you have to communicate to the vendors at this point that you're in that phase 1 of that 2-year buying cycle, that you're trying to get a budget, you're trying to get a price so that you can obtain budget. And the sooner you tell vendors that, the better, in my experience. You don't want to confuse them that they think there's a sale down the end of, or maybe there is a sale, but they think there's a sale imminent for them. So just to tell them that, listen, I need a high-level cost estimate proposal for obtaining budget purposes. You just got to memorize that line. And what that'll allow you to do is exactly that. Most vendors will give you the high-level pricing. Once you have that high-level pricing, preferably in a written format and preferably based on your high-level requirements, you have some level of protection to create a business case of what you can expect your costs to be. And that's really important because there is no way to get budget the first time, in my opinion, if you can't tell your executives what the anticipated cost is going to be. And so what very often happens is say, we want to replace our LMS. Your executives say, that's cool. And you say, okay, well, what's that going to cost to replace your LMS, by the way? Well, I don't know that. Well, how about, you go through a sale. And so what they do is they compress those 2 fiscal years and they try to compress it into one. You go through the whole sales process, you get an RFP, you get the demonstrations, and you finally get to analyzing the pricing, and it's $1 million and the purchase doesn't happen. So you have to break it into the 2 pieces so that you can go to your management of what this replacement is going to cost, so that way you can satisfy that universal equation of missed opportunities plus the cost of your current solution if that's greater than the replacement solution. That's the only way to get to it. So how do you do that, practically speaking? So you just got to compare the new and old vendors. So this is what I do. I do this every single day. Down the left-hand side, I take the cost of a current solution. And so Aaron was talking about going through the contracts. So you go through, you find out what all those line items are. Your list might be different. You might have perpetual license on there, or location license, or administrative support, or upgrades, or who knows what. But you go through and you find out each line, and you got to take it. So like take a year period. So it's not necessarily year 1 because you're already on that solution, but take the next 12 months of using that solution, and you want to figure out what that next 12 months is going to cost. And so you add all that up, you get to that $95,000. In fact, in this scenario, every year it's going to be $95,000 to continue on using this. So my 2-year cost is $190,000 to keep my current solution. And you can take this out as long as you want, and sometimes your costs are going to go up because you're growing your usage. And then what you do is you compare that against vendor option number 1 and vendor 2, and you take that high-level pricing. It's going to look a lot different, most likely, than your current contracts. That's going to most likely be around things like an annual license that is the same, or based on the number of users or based on your requirements. You're going to have to compensate for that one-time setup. So whatever that setup is with the vendor, it could be zero, could be $250,000. But you have to count that one-time setup in year 1 because that has to be under that year 2 cost to make it feasible. And then whatever your customer support, in this case, the new functionality is going to alleviate the need for these manual workarounds. And so what that allows is that, now the first year cost is 105, but the second year cost is 80, and now it's actually, you save $5,000 over a 2-year period, but each particular year going forward, you'll save the delta between 80 and 95, that 15. And so you can stack one up after another. And sometimes it's going to be like, it's a wash. Like this one right here, 185, 190, it seems like a lot of hassle. But another one might be, you'll save $75,000. And the only way to do it is to stack them on top of each other, in my experience, so that you get to a nice way to visually see what it's going to cost. So current spending, missed opportunities, cost of new solutions. Okay, so what selections factors matter most? And really this is all going to go around to define your requirements like a pro. I think, and I write about it, I talk about it all the time, but this is the number 1 thing a buyer can do, and the sooner they do it, the better they do it. But defining your requirements is the key to all success, because until you know exactly what you need in all your different areas, then what you're doing is you're letting the vendor educate you. And sometimes, that's great. But if you already know what you want, then you can really skip that step. And that's an expensive step, the education step in time and effort. And so I think it's better for an organization to get their ducks in a row first. And then that way, the discussions with the vendors around your business problem and around your exact requirements versus what your requirements may be. And I think it's a much more efficient way to get to it. So like I said here, we're closing right in on a lot of content for the hour, but let's launch one more slide here, one more survey quick.
What's the most important buying factor? Cost, functionality, service and support, location, or other?
Cost, functionality, service support, or location. So we have our most lopsided poll of the day here. will show functionality. And certainly that's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, if the system can't do what you want it to do, all these rest of these things are not important. But what I found is that the rest of these things are awfully important if you find a couple of vendors that have the same functional footprint. So if all things are equal from a functionality standpoint, what really matters? And how can you up your odds of success from that? And so we talked about at the very beginning of the presentation, now we're going to wrap it right around together here in our last few minutes, that those 700 vendors, to answer a question here that came in, yes, there is mergers and acquisitions happening in that, but with each merger and acquisition, there's more vendors entering, so it doesn't seem to impact the number of vendors in this space. But the vendor differentiation, those 700, those 4 intersecting circles, the range from free self-service to full service, all those things are the basis of defining your requirements like a pro. So using the differentiation of the vendors and thinking about how that differentiation will impact your business as a learning organization will allow you to find those specialists that specialize in your differentiation. And it's kind of like matchmaking for LMSs. You take those 28 points of compatibility and you frame them out. And so what are some of those things? So we got on it right from the very first poll. What is your intended use? Those 4 intersecting circles of LMSs. Who are the audiences that you intend to impact, and that you intend to impact from day 1 versus year 2 and year 3. So think about the audiences, so who they are. And so just by the nature of not having these checked, for example, allows me to disqualify hundreds and hundreds of LMSs that focus on those particular things. So you work it backwards. So what functionality do you need? So these are the functionality groups or types of groups. So, learner functionality, is it social, is it mobile? What does that mean? Gamification, skill management, is it functionality, for instructors, if you're an instructor-led business, or what matters most to you from an administrative standpoint? Each client that I have find that places a different premium on the type of functions that are important to them. Some organizations are very heavy from an administrative buying standpoint, and others only care about the end user. So it's important to map that out. But you have to, please, if you do anything, skip the dreaded functionality matrix. So there are so many of these out in the marketplace today with what they are. They have, everybody's seen them. If you shop for an LMS, you see they have these thousands of requirements in them, and you just go down through and you're like, validated environment. Yeah, sure, that's a must-have. I don't know what it means. Trails must-have. Workflow features must-have. Roll you up. OJT, well, we're not doing that, but I want a system that has it. Moon rockets, yes, definitely. Mind reading. Holodeck training, yes, we want to support that. Optical access, sign-on, fingerproofing, waterproof submerge. And what you find is that organizations don't know how to say no, so everything is like this must-have. And so Aaron and myself, we got in our sales things, you would get the same matrix because they're out in the industry, and the same 1,000 requirements would be checked as a must-have requirements. And the problem with that is that there's only a few handful of companies that can do all 1,000 requirements, so you end up with the same boring LMSs that are hard to buy and expensive to configure, and they're still not tied to your thing. So skip that and instead use functional use cases. That's the step-by-step sequence of the function and the user together. We identified who those target audiences are. Now, what do you want each one of them to do? How are they, what do we need them to do? Do we need them just to take compliance training? Are we looking to turn them into lifelong learners? Are we trying to sell content? And if so, how does that user interact with the LMS? How do they find the LMS? How do they know it's there? How do they log in? How do they find their assigned content? Do they search for content? What do you want them to do? Do you want them to interact with other users? And so as a group, as a team, a buying team, you need to define these things out. And if you can't find an immediate or even a 2 or 3 year use for those things, well, then they're not really a requirement. They're just a nice to have. And so you should get rid of those. And what you result in is 100 to 150 critical requirements versus 1,000 must to have. What's an example of a functional use case? Well, it's to take that user grouping, instead of saying must have, you talk about how that user grouping would impact your particular organization. In this one, they have industry service group memberships, and that impacts access to training and content, and we need to drive that from information that we have in Salesforce that's dynamically being updated to group our users into different groups so that they can have different content. And we also need to do these other things in terms of to group users in these others. And so instead of just saying, yes, it's a must-have, this paints a picture, and if you do this for the different functionality groups, you now have a roadmap or a blueprint that you can give to vendors and say, this is what I need. And so the technical requirements finally have a power to derail a product from integrations to security standards to deployment models. From a professional service standpoint, being honest about how much help you're going to need and how much resources you have from a team standpoint and how much is expected by the vendors, and defining out that help of what you're going to need and what integrations and how much data you want to migrate, and do you need any content development or administrative training. And then to think about from a support standpoint of, do we just need administrator support? Are we going to want support for our end learners? Do we want it just Monday through Friday? Do we want it around the clock? Does it need to be in English or Spanish? Do we need dedicated resources inside the organization, or can we just work with the open line? Do we need user groups and regional meetings to be successful? These are the things to define from an online standpoint. We talked a lot about license models today, but just the different ways of counting licenses from a registration or a per product or a perpetual basis, and understanding how you use it. If you have employees, then you want named users. If you have extended enterprise, most likely you'd like registration based, so you're just paying when you use the system. And if you can align your license model with the vendor that provides those particular license models, then you only pay for success, and you're not paying for an incorrect alignment of a model, which is the other option. So finally, in a conclusion, it's a buyer's market, but you got to get budget. But if you can answer some simple questions like buying your LMS a few years ago, you have the practical ways to afford it, and then tying that to the actual opportunities missed and the return on investment is a way to combine that to get you over the hump. And because the general price point of all the solutions has gone down in the industry, with just a little bit of homework, a little bit of rolling up your sleeves, if you don't like your LMS, you got a good chance that you can get off it. And if you want to buy one for the first time, there's just options out there from no cost to ridiculously expensive. But there's something out there for everybody that you can get in the game of learning technologies. But no matter what side you're on, buying small or buying big, defining your requirements like a pro is the number one key for success. So there you have it, folks. We could probably go on if you let Aaron and I for days straight on what we think that you should do from a buying standpoint. But I think just changing the frame of reference of understanding that new marketplace and how that impacts the choices that you have today is what we were hoping to get across to you. So Aaron, thank you very much. Great to present with you again after all these years. Appreciate you providing your insight and value your comments and your experience here. So thanks, everybody. We'll follow up afterwards with a recording to the session so that you can go back or spread around your team if you so desire. And please let Aaron or I know if you have any questions from the presentation or about your selection process, or just want to bounce something off us. We're happy to help. Thanks for investing so much time. Have a great day, everyone.